Introduction: The default male. Seeing men as the human default is fundamental to the structure of human society. It's an old habit and it runs deep as theories of human evolution itself. In the 4th century BC, Aristotle was already baldly articulating male default as unarguable fact. The first departure from type is indeed that the offspring should become female instead of male, he wrote in his biological treatise on the generation of animals. He did allow that this aberration was, however, a natural necessity. Over 2,000 years later, in 1966, the University of Chicago held a symposium on primitive hunter-gatherer societies. It was called Man the Hunter. Over 75 social anthropologists from around the world gathered to debate the centrality of hunting to human evolution and development. The consensus was that it is pretty central. The biology, psychology, and customs that separate us from the apes, all those we owe to the hunters of time past, claimed one of the papers published in the resulting book. Which is all very well, only, as feminists pointed out, this theory poses something of a problem for female evolution. Because, as the book made clear, hunting was a male activity, so if our intellect, interests, emotions, and basic social life are all evolutionary products of the success of hunting adaptation, what does that mean for women's humanity? If human evolution is driven by men, are women even human? In her now classic 1975 essay, Woman the Gatherer, anthropologist Sally Slocum challenged the primacy of man the hunter. Anthropologists, she argued, search for examples of the behavior of males and assume that this is sufficient for explanation. And so she asked a simple question to fill the silence. What were the females doing while the males were out hunting? Answer: gathering, weaning, caring for children during longer periods of infant dependency, all of which would similarly have required cooperation. In the context of this knowledge, the conclusion that the basic human adaptation was the desire of males to hunt and kill, objects Slocum, gives too much importance to aggression, which is after all only one factor of human life. Slocum made her critique over 40 years ago now, but the male bias in evolutionary theory persists. Humans evolved to have an instinct for deadly violence, researchers find, read a 2016 headline in The Independent. The article reported on an academic paper called The Phylogenetic Roots of Human Lethal Violence, which claimed to reveal that humans have evolved to be 6 times more deadly to their own species than the average mammal. This is no doubt true of our species overall, but the reality of human-on-human lethal violence is that it is overwhelmingly a male occupation. A 30-year analysis of murder in Sweden found that 9 out of 10 murders are committed by men. This holds with statistics from other countries, including Australia, the UK, and the US. A 2013 UN homicide survey found that 96% of homicide perpetrators worldwide are male. So, is it humans who are murderous, or men? And if women aren't on the whole murdering, what are we to think of female phylogenetics? The male, unless otherwise indicated, approach to research seems to have infected all sorts of ethnographic fields. Cave paintings, for example, are often of game animals, and so researchers have assumed they were done by men, the hunters, but new analysis of handprints that appear alongside such paintings in cave sites in France and Spain has suggested that the majority were actually done by women. Even human bones are not exempt from male unless otherwise indicated thinking. We might think of human skeletons as being objectively either male or female and therefore exempt from male default thinking. We would be wrong. For over 100 years, a 10th century Viking skeleton known as the Burka warrior had, despite possessing an apparently female pelvis, been assumed to be male because it was buried alongside a full set of weapons and 2 sacrificed horses. These grave contents indicated that the occupant had been a warrior. A warrior meant male. Archaeologists put the numerous references to female fighters in Viking lore down to mythical embellishments. But although weapons apparently trump the pelvis when it comes to sex, they don't trump DNA, and in 2017, testing confirmed that these bones did indeed belong to a woman. The argument didn't, however, end there. It just shifted. The bones might have been mixed up. There might be other reasons a female body was buried with these items. Naysaying scholars might have a point on both counts, although based on the layout of the grave contents, the original authors dismiss these criticisms. But the resistance is nevertheless revealing, particularly since male skeletons in similar circumstances are not questioned in the same way. Indeed, when archaeologists dig up grave sites, they nearly always find more males, which, as noted anthropologist Philip Walker dryly noted in a 1995 book chapter on sexing skulls, is not consistent with what we know about the sex ratios of extant human populations. And given Viking women could own property, could inherit, and could become powerful merchants, is it so impossible that they could have fought too? After all, these are far from the only female warrior bones that have been discovered. Battle-scarred skeletons of multiple women have been found across the Eurasian steppes from Bulgaria to Mongolia, wrote Natalie Haynes in The Guardian. For people such as the ancient Scythians, who fought on horseback with bows and arrows, there was no innate male warrior advantage, and DNA testing of skeletons buried with weapons in more than 1,000 Scythian burial mounds from Ukraine to Central Asia have revealed that up to 37% of Scythian women and girls were active warriors. The extent to which male, unless otherwise indicated, permeates our thinking may seem less surprising when you realize that it is also embedded in one of the most basic building blocks of society, language itself. Indeed, when Slocum criticized male bias in anthropology, she pointed out that this bias appeared not only in the ways in which the scanty data are interpreted, but in the very language used. The word man, she wrote, is used in such an ambiguous fashion that it is impossible to decide whether it refers to males or to the human species in general. This collapse in meaning led Slocum to suspect that, in the minds of many anthropologists, man, supposedly meaning the human species, is actually exactly synonymous with males. As we shall see, the evidence suggests that she was probably right. In Muriel Rickerson's poem Myth, an old, blind Oedipus asks the Sphinx, "Why didn't I recognize my mother?" The Sphinx replies that Oedipus answered her question, "What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 3 in the evening," incorrectly. "You answered man. You didn't say anything about woman." "But," replies Oedipus, "when you say man, you include women too. Everyone knows that." But in fact, the Sphinx was right, and Oedipus is wrong. When you say man, you don't include women too, even if everyone does technically know that. Numerous studies in a variety of languages over the past 40 years have consistently found that what is called the generic masculine, using words like he in a gender-neutral way, is not in fact read generically. It is read overwhelmingly as male. When the generic masculine is used, people are more likely to recall famous men than famous women, to estimate a profession as male-dominated, to suggest male candidates for jobs and political appointments. Women are also less likely to apply and less likely to perform well in interviews for jobs that are advertised using the generic masculine. In fact, the generic masculine is read so overwhelmingly as male that it even overrides otherwise powerful stereotypes, such that professions such as beautician, which are usually stereotyped female, are suddenly seen as male. It even distorts scientific studies, creating a kind of meta-gender data gap. A 2015 paper looking at self-report bias in psychological studies found that the use of the generic masculine in questionnaires affected women's responses, potentially distorting the meaning of test scores. The authors concluded that its use may portray unreal differences between men and women, which would not appear in the gender-neutral form or in natural gender language versions of the same questionnaire. And yet, in the face of decades of evidence that the generic masculine is anything but clear, official language policy in many countries continues to insist that it is purely a formality whose use must continue for the sake of clarity. As recently as 2017, the Académie Française, France's ultimate authority on the French language, was thundering against the aberration of inclusive writing, claiming that the French language finds itself in mortal danger from workarounds for the generic masculine. Other countries, including Spain and Israel, have faced similar rows. Because English is not a grammatically gendered language, the generic masculine is fairly restricted in modern usage. Terms like doctor and poet used to be generic masculine, with specifically female doctors and poets referred to, usually derisively, as poetesses and doctoresses, but are now considered gender neutral. But while the formal use of the generic masculine only really clings on in the writings of pedants who still insist on using he to mean he or she, it has made something of a comeback in the informal usage of Americanisms such as dude and guys, and in the UK, lads as supposedly gender-neutral terms. A recent row in the UK also showed that, for some, male default still matters an awful lot. When in 2017 the first female head of London's fire brigade, Danny Cotton, suggested that we should replace fireman with the now standard, and let's face it, much cooler, firefighter, she received a deluge of hate mail. Languages such as French, German, and Spanish, however, are what are called gender-inflected, and here the concept of masculine and feminine is woven into the language itself. All nouns are gendered either masculine or feminine. A table is feminine, but a car is masculine. La mesa roja, the red table. El coche roja, the red car. When it comes to nouns that refer to people, while both male and female terms exist, the standard gender is always masculine. Try searching Google for lawyer in German. It comes back Anwalt, which literally means male lawyer, but is also used generically as just lawyer. If you want to refer to a female lawyer specifically, you would say Anwalten. Incidentally, the way female terms are often as here modified male terms is another subtle way we position the female as a deviation from male type, as in de Beauvoir's terms, other. The generic masculine is also used when referring to groups of people. When the gender is unknown, or if it's a mixed group, the generic masculine is used. So a group of 100 female teachers in Spanish would be referred to as las profesoras, but as soon as you add a single male teacher, the group suddenly becomes los profesores, such is the power of the default male. In gender-inflected languages, the generic masculine remains pervasive. Job vacancies are still often announced with masculine forms, particularly if they are for leadership roles. A recent Austrian study of the language used in leadership job ads found a 27-to-1 ratio of masculine to gender-fair forms, using both the male and female term. The European Parliament believes it has found a solution to this problem, and since 2008 has recommended that MF be added on the end of job ads in gender-inflected languages. The idea is that this makes the generic masculine more fair by reminding us that women exist. It's a nice idea, but it wasn't backed up by data. When researchers did test its impact, they found that it made no difference to the exclusionary impact of using the generic masculine on its own, illustrating the importance of collecting data and then creating policy. Does all this arguing over words make any real-world difference? Arguably, yes. In 2012, a World Economic Forum analysis found that countries with gender-inflected languages, which have strong ideas of masculine and feminine present in almost every utterance, are the most unequal in terms of gender. But here's an interesting quirk. Countries with genderless languages, such as Hungarian and Finnish, are not the most equal. Instead, the honor belongs to a third group, countries with natural gender languages, such as English. These languages allow gender to be marked, female teacher, male nurse, but largely don't encode it into the words themselves. The study authors suggested that if you can't mark gender in any way, you can't correct the hidden bias in a language by emphasizing women's presence in the world. In short, because men go without saying, it matters when women literally can't get said at all. It's tempting to think that the male bias that is embedded in language is simply a relic of more regressive times, but the evidence does not point that way. The world's fastest growing language, used by more than 90% of the world's online population, is emoji. This language originated in Japan in the 1980s, and women are its heaviest users. 78% of women versus 60% of men frequently use emoji, and yet, until 2016, the world of emojis was curiously male. The emojis we have on our smartphones are chosen by the rather grand-sounding Unicode Consortium, a Silicon Valley-based group of organizations that work together to ensure universal international software standards. If Unicode decides a particular emoji, say spy, should be added to the current stable, they will decide on the code that should be used. Each phone manufacturer or platform such as Twitter and Facebook will then decide their own interpretation of what a spy looks like. but they will all use the same code so that when users communicate between different platforms, they are broadly all saying the same thing. An emoji face with heart eyes is an emoji face with heart eyes. Unicode has not historically specified the gender for most emoji characters. The emoji that most platforms originally represented as a man running was not called man running, it was just called runner. Similarly, the original emoji for police officer was described by Unicode as police officer, not policeman. It was the individual platforms that all interpreted these gender-neutral terms as male. In 2016, Unicode decided to do something about this. Abandoning their previously neutral gender stance, they decided to explicitly gender all emojis that depicted people. So instead of runner, which had been universally represented as male runner, Unicode issued code for explicitly male runner and explicitly female runner. Male and female options now exist for all professions and athletes. It's a small victory, but a significant one. It's easy to slam phone manufacturers and social media platforms as sexist, and as we shall see, they are, if often unknowingly. But the reality is that even if they had somehow managed to design an image of a gender-neutral runner, most of us would still have read that runner as male, because we read most things as male unless they are specifically marked as female. And so while it is of course to be hoped that angry grammarians will come round to the idea that saying he and she, or even, God forbid, she and he, instead of just he, may not be the worst thing that has ever happened to them, the truth is that getting rid of the generic masculine would only be half the battle. Male bias is so firmly embedded in our psyche that even genuinely gender-neutral words are read as male. A 2015 study identified the top 5 words used to refer to people in human-computer interaction papers published in 2014 and found that they are all apparently gender-neutral: user, participant, person, designer, and researcher. Well done, human-computer interaction academics, but there is, of course, a catch. When study participants were instructed to think about one of these words for 10 seconds and then draw an image of it, it turned out that these apparently gender-neutral words were not perceived as equally likely to be male or female. For male participants, only designer was interpreted as male less than 80% of the time. It was still almost 70% male. A researcher was more likely to be depicted as of no gender than as a female. Women were slightly less gender biased, but on the whole were still more likely to read gender-neutral words as male, with only person and participant, both read by about 80% of male participants as male, being about 50-50. This rather disheartening finding tallies with decades of draw a scientist data, where participants overwhelmingly draw men. The bias has historically been so extreme that media around the world celebrated as great progress a recent paper which found that 28% of children now draw women. It also tallies, perhaps more disturbingly, with a 2008 study in which Pakistani students, aged 9 and 10, who were asked to draw an image of us, hardly any of the female students drew women and none of the male students did. We don't even allow non-humans to escape our perception of the world as overwhelmingly male. When researchers in one study attempted to prompt participants to see a gender-neutral stuffed animal as female by using female pronouns, children, parents, and carers still overwhelmingly refer to the animal as he. The study found that an animal must be super feminine before even close to half of participants will refer to it as she rather than he. To be fair, it's not an entirely unreasonable assumption. Often it really is a he. A 2007 international study of 25,439 children's TV characters found that only 13% of non-human characters are female. The figure for female human characters was slightly better, although still low at 32%. An analysis of G-rated, suitable for children films, released between 1990 and 2005, found that only 28% of speaking roles went to female characters, and perhaps even more tellingly in the context of human beings being male by default, women made up only 17% of crowd scenes. Men don't just have more roles, they also spend twice as much time on screen.